think the communication process for the population white paper was poor, and on hindsight we could have done it much better. Now, in fact, the question of how the discussion of population white paper in the Singapore conversation should have dovetailed has been raised quite a number of times, because it was almost seen as two parallel processes, and it was it was actually two parallel processes. It might appear as two parallel processes, but actually there was some areas of convergence that we were seeking. Now, one part of that is that the discussion on population white paper actually started in February or March last year, and the national conversation, the Singapore conversation, started only in August. Yeah. So when we were launching the Singapore conversation, the question was whether do we wrap this population discussion into this. But in the end, we decided that since that has started, it should continue, because and indeed the business of government should not be put on hold, even as we talk about some of these long-term issues. So that was the approach. Although, of course, the population white paper was also about long-term issues. Yeah. Now, having said that, I think if we look back at the population white paper, first, the intent of having the discussion, the intent of setting out the key issue is a good one. And second, some of the very key issues which are discussed in the population, in the white paper, remains as very important issues for us to continue the conversation. So, for instance, this whole point about, how do you maintain a Singaporean core, knowing that if you project the number of Singaporeans, if we do nothing about it, will shrink, and you cannot maintain a Singaporean core if you do not have the numbers. By having had the numbers, we have to then consider what does it mean for the Singaporean identity, and how do you maintain the Singaporean identity, which also came out quite strongly in the Singapore conversation. I think where the population white paper the discussion went wrong was a focus on the headline number, and then everybody thought, okay, this is about a population of 6.9 million, and there is a sense of a disjoint between what I'm experiencing daily and what are some of those issues, even though the core issues that were being discussed in the white paper were really about some of these very important issues which Singaporeans are faced with. For instance, infrastructure planning. Yeah, and that's my point about having a sense of where the long run is, and therefore being able to then take that as a kind of a guidepost, and then to work back and say, if that is going to be the consequence, then how might we then adjust? How might we then plan ahead, and so on? Yeah. So when it comes to the Singapore conversation, how that we might do it better, I would say that if we had discussed it in terms of what are the fundamental issues about the Singaporean identity, the size of Singaporeans, the Singaporean core, how should we have a major policy change and plan ahead of demand? How do we restructure the economy? How do we take care of an aging population when our own Singaporean core is shrinking and the number of elderly is going to triple from 300,000 to 900,000? Now, how might we deal with all those issues? I think we would have been more focused on the critical issues that we need to deal with than to start with that this might be the numbers that this might be the range of numbers that might help us resolve these issues. This might be the range of policies that might help us resolve this issue. In other words, we set out the issues first about what are some of these. And in fact, some of these issues, I believe, will also come up, bottom up. They also come bottom up. And I've seen some of this in our Singapore conversation.